question is, do you have any tips for students who may be thinking of asking you specifically for a letter of recommendation? Um, every faculty has their own preferences, so it's nice to hear kind of what people are thinking. There is kind of a standard for some faculty, but I know for certain faculty, there can be different asks. So is there anything that a student should consider if they're considering you as a letter of recommendation?
Well, I'm going to jump in for just a second and say I turned down the first student ever in my life who's asked me for a letter of recommendation just yesterday. And this is a student I really care about. They came to me with 24 hours notice for a deadline for an application, not to graduate school, but for an application to a pretty significant scholarship program. And I mean, I didn't even have a moment in my day when I could have considered writing that letter. And I took some time to write them back and, and tried to make it a gentle, teachable moment. And I thought this student was going to be very sad and upset. And she responded back with shock and horror that honestly, she didn't understand that we couldn't ask for a letter of recommendation with just 24 hours notice, truly. So I think giving your faculty members time is one thing. I have always told students a minimum of 4 weeks is a kindness, and some faculty will ask for more than that depending on what the letter is. If it's a letter for graduate school, if it's a letter for a scholarship, if it's a letter for the Husky 100, which is, a much simpler thing for a faculty member to write. So I'll stop there. Yeah.
Everything Nancy just said resonates with me and very broadly, I think. I'll just add here a couple things. First of all, I use a form, and I started doing that about 8 years ago. And so if someone asks me for a recommendation, and they very often do it as a one-liner in an email, I say, hey, happy to consider it. Here's, attached is my application form and or request form, and fill it out and send it back. And there, it's about 4 pages long, and it says, it asks a number of questions about, how well do we know each other, and what context has it been in, and how long, and all these things. And then, if you've answered yes to these, then, continue. And if not, then maybe you need to find someone who can write a more substantial letter for you. So I kind of use that request form to put across some of that teaching moment that you were talking about, Nancy, including the time, like as a courtesy, I require, at least 2 or 3 weeks, something like that. And one thing that might be important to remember as a student is that you're not the only one asking them for a letter of recommendation. Unfortunately, and oddly, these things are seasonal, right? Like in academia, like in fall, you apply to all these things. And what that means is that in fall, absolutely everyone who applies asks, and they have to. And so I have some colleagues who I would not be surprised if they write upwards of 30 letters every fall. And just think about, I think it's hard to imagine what's involved in that, but it's a lot of letters, and they want to do you right, and they want to represent you well and advocate for you well. So. Yeah, so I just try to remember that. And honestly, full disclosure, like I always try to remember that my course is not the only course that students are taking, right? We just kind of have to remember we see each other in just this kind of one way in this course. But actually each of us has, a fuller schedule, lives, other people involved. And so that's where I think courteousness and forethought that Nancy was recommending is absolutely right on.
Yeah, I would just amplify briefly everything that everybody has said so far. We want to support you. Like no student should hesitate. If you've taken a class with me, and it's been a successful class, you feel you've shown good work in the class. My comments have suggested that I thought you showed good work in the class. then absolutely you should never hesitate to ask for a letter. But I would say my advice to anybody would be 4 weeks is a minimum. Give it 3 months. We want to do right. A letter takes time to write. The only kind of letter that will serve you is a letter that is detailed, that is specific.
Mhm.
One of the things, I don't have a form, but I will ask you to share with me all the written work for my class. So I will want to see your work so I can remind myself of it, so I can really talk about your strengths. I will ask you for your draft application. I want to know your statement of purpose. I want to know how you're pitching yourself so I can affirm that. I don't want to, talk up a whole bunch of skills that are not the ones that you're putting forward. That is work. I am happy to do it for you, but you're not the only student asking me. So just plan ahead. I would absolutely plan ahead. And I would also suggest ask for more letters than you strictly will need.
Yeah.
So, if it's 3 letters that you need, line up 4 or even 5. Just recognize that I will say, full disclosure, my son is just finished applying to the Master's in Social Work. And he asked 5 faculty members, all of whom knew him well, and he'd done well with them, and he heard back very affirmatively from 3. So that's just give yourself time, give yourself buffers, and be ready to do some work at your end to sort of share your draft statement of purpose. That you can't. The short version is you cannot last minute this.
Yeah, I think.
Sorry,
No, please, Eric.
I was just thinking of add-ons. This is not the weeds, I think, but it's very important to me. I was thinking of, what it takes to agree to write a letter. It's very important to me. I do not write, okay, as an applicant, you have a question that you have to answer. Do you waive the right to read the recommendation or not? And so in other words, I only write anonymous recommendations, like recommendations that are not available to the students. If they do not waive their right to view it, I do not write, period. And I make that clear in my form. Why? Because I don't trust a letter that that someone obviously doesn't trust either. So there's maybe that's getting kind of too much in the weeds here, but I think it's important. The other thing is just thinking about the end of the process, just briefly around letters. I made a huge mistake as an applicant. I asked someone for a letter and I never followed up with them. And I got in, and I went away. And then I saw the person at a convention the following year and they said, "You never thanked me. You never came back and told me that you got in. You never gave me a chance to celebrate," or that was really, really unprofessional of you. And I was, gosh, I don't want anyone to have that experience. The person was right. Follow up, even if you don't get in, follow up and just say, "Hey, I just want to keep you, up on, my plans," because chances are, if you want to go to grad school, you'll probably apply again. And that's what I did. And maybe that's the time, or to maintain that relationship, that communication. Yeah.
I completely agree with that. I think there's this kind of work that you put into the relationship with the faculty member who's writing you the letters. And so, for instance, right, you might go to a faculty member in August and say, "Oh, I'm applying to 4 programs. Could you write me a letter?" And then in October, you decide there's 2 more programs because you've been doing research. And so you want to have had, some communication with the faculty member so you can keep kind of changing and adapting as the process goes on. Say, hypothetically, you get into only 1 program and you decide not to go. You want to have that relationship maintained so that maybe you can do a next round the next year. I think all of that is really, really important. And then to kind of address the question of how do you get over your kind of fear or trepidation of going to the faculty member, I think this is just really important to emphasize, is that in going to them, you've kind of announced to them the subject that you teach. Where I was in maybe 2-year classes or something like that, I became really serious about it. And I want to do that for longer. Maybe not my whole life, who knows what it'll become, but maybe my whole life. Maybe this is something that I'm really committing to. And that's a really exciting thing for a faculty member to hear. And so I think if you just kind of keep that back in your mind, there's this kind of instinctive receptive kind of quality on the part of the faculty member to say, oh, wow, that's really great. This thing that we were talking about in class is now kind of taken hold of you, and you're going to explore it some more, just like I did years ago. So yeah, I think people are going to be, as a general rule of thumb, even though it's a very work intensive kind of process, they're going to be inclined to really want to help you. I think it's there's a moment of connection there about the subject that's really important.
I agree, and that connection, I think, has maybe for the current generation of students, it's difficult to establish and maintain, because no one goes to office hours anymore. Everything's kind of via text and social media, and so I can understand if you don't have that kind of human connection with the faculty member, that you might be even more reluctant or embarrassed or something to ask. And so, yeah, you're just making me realize, Nikki, that you don't have to have a relationship with a faculty member, right? A friendly one, but talking between classes, reaching out in person really makes a difference. That's why we're here. Like I always tell graduate students, actually, tell me about how you've been using the library, and those librarians just sit there. They've trained. They've been waiting for people to come in, and so graduate students are always amazed at how much help they get from librarians, and it's kind of like that with teachers too. So I think.
Yeah, I think that's a really lovely way to phrase it, Nikki, that, yeah, I mean, I would add to that too, that, it's really gratifying that to see that, that we share these interests, that we share this commitment, with our students. But it's also, I think also the other piece I would add to that is, I'm also really aware that I got where I am today because people wrote letters for me.
Yeah.
Benevolent cycle. I want, the only reasons that I will not write a letter for you is one, if you ask me 24, if I literally can't, right? If you've last minute it and it's just simply not possible for me. Or if I really just don't feel that I'm in a position to do right by you. If I've had you in a large lecture class and we've never engaged one-on-one, and I just don't feel that I have a kind of full enough sense of you to serve you well. Those are really the only reasons. So you shouldn't hesitate to ask. It's totally fair to ask. If you can stop by office hours or even a Zoom office hour to ask rather than emailing, that's also great.
Yeah.
The thing is, though, is that UW or our research universities, it's like, I'm just thinking of what Eva was saying about, not being able to do right by someone. I have spoken with students so let's say I have a class with 250 students, and they ask me for a rec, and I say, I don't really know your work or how you think and how, and I mean it. And that's that for me is a deal breaker too. But then so often they'll come back and say, you're the only professor I have. Everyone else is a TA. And at a big university, that happens. I get it. And it's not good. But then what? The only faculty member says with good reasons, that they probably can't help you out much here. And so then what do you do? And that's a big pickle. I don't know. I don't have an answer to that.
I think the takeaway from that is, if you're thinking about graduate school, it's really good in your course selection, at least in your senior year, to try to take some classes that are smaller discussion focused classes.